Perfect example right now is what's going on with Art Acevedo in Miami. And, I was involved in a lawsuit with the city of Houston while Art Acevedo was chief. You were, of course, a trainer while Art Acevedo was chief. Mm-hmm. And, what I really hope that the people in Miami understand is you just dodged a big bullet. Oh. You dodged a huge 50 caliber bullet of morale destruction that was coming at you full speed. And right or wrong, good or bad, you got rid of him. And you should be thankful to get rid of him. Yes. Because if you look at the California Highway Patrol, if you look at the state of California, where Art Acevedo was a chief, if you look at Austin, where he was chief, if you look at Houston, he was chief, what did you see? Well, over time, under his leadership, you had an increase in the homeless population. You had an increase in response times, and you had an increase in crime. And it is without doubt not an accident that he happened to be the chief of police in these 3 locations that all suffered the exact same thing, because ultimately you don't want your homeless population to increase. You don't want higher crime, and you don't want police officers taking longer to respond to 911 calls. But everywhere he goes, that's what happens. There's a reason for that. We're going to explain why that happens. We're going to explain how, under his command, these circumstances arise, and they just crush the morale of police officers in each respective department. Joseph, you worked under him as a trainer. What did you see?
Unreasonable rules, unreasonable enforcement of rules. And I know people are going, well, cops got to follow the rules. Yes, we have a rule or two, okay, in the Houston Police Department, 863 general orders, okay, or whatever it is, okay. There's a huge amount of general orders we have out there. We have to follow them. And police officers always have to follow rules. And if we don't follow rules, it all goes to pot, okay? But there is a thing called reasonable. Like it is reasonable to make a police officer wear, I'm also doing my engineer thing here. We don't have a producer yet. I'll click and subscribe, and maybe we can get one. What is reasonable to make a police officer wear their seatbelt while they're driving? Certainly. It is reasonable when you're going down the road or to a call, to a Code 1 emergency call, to wear your seatbelt. Most police officers are injured or killed in auto accidents. It's reasonable. It's also reasonable when you arrive at this call in the parking lot or a block away that you take off your seatbelt. And officers for years, I won't get caught in the seat if I'm getting shot at. Well, yeah, 8 miles away, that's probably not a possibility. 100 yards away, you better believe it is. But officers were actually disciplined, days off. I mean, think about your job. You all of a sudden your boss says you can't have pay for a week. Okay, I mean that hurts. That's a big hit. 5 days off, 3 days off, whatever it is, because you literally got out of your car and your body camera is recording this in a parking lot, which is it's not even required by law to have the seatbelt on in a parking lot for anyone. And it's not required that police officers wear their seatbelt ever. It's a city policy. So it is unreasonable to punish an officer because as he's putting it in park, the seatbelt comes off and he drove 6-8 feet, which is it's not uncommon. That was not an uncommon thing. So when police officers are confronted by this, that is unreasonable.
So let's give some background to the audience. So if I recall correctly, 2 officers, they're riding a 2-man unit, get a Code 1 911 call to a robbery in progress. They're responding to the robbery in progress. They have their seatbelts on. They're wearing their body cameras. The body camera's showing what is going on in front of them. They're pulling into the parking lot where they believe the robbery in progress is occurring. And before they stop their vehicle, they start taking off their seatbelts because that's one more step. You have to get out of your vehicle is to, make sure that you can maintain tactical advantage in case the suspect, there is one.
Yes.
He is armed and he comes out shooting at you. You want to be able to get out of your vehicle as fast as possible and return fire. Okay, so they're not actually on the street, but they're in the parking lot driving still, and they're taking off their seatbelts. And so their body camera captures them taking their seatbelts off before they stop their vehicle and put it in park. And as a result, they wound up both getting a day or two off, suspended.
It's just unreasonable.
So, of course, what does that do? What does that do is that story runs like wildfire through the department. Oh, my God, these guys got suspended for taking their seatbelts off before they stopped their vehicle while responding to a Code 1 call, which we all know is just absolute. That's irrational. That's the irrational application of department policy. And we'll put that department policy up so you can understand it. When other officers heard this happening, they're like, well, I don't want that to happen to me. Most police officers don't want to get shot. That's what I've learned about as a police officer. Like, you'll do everything you can to avoid getting shot. And if one of the things you can do to avoid getting shot, putting yourself at a tactical disadvantage, is to take longer to respond to a Code 1 call, you'll do it.
Yes, every day.
Let's say you're on patrol, you're in your patrol car, you get a Code 1 call, and you're right down the street from it. You could be there in a minute. But you know that Big Brother is watching everything you do on your body camera. And any mistake you make will be picked up by your body camera. You're going to do everything you can to avoid mistakes. So instead of responding to that call in 90 seconds or 2 minutes, you'll take as long as you can, because what that does is it gives the suspect a chance to get away.
Get away. Yeah. So you don't have to take any action. So just your seatbelt coming off gets you days off. You can imagine actually catching a suspect
and having to shoot someone.
Yeah.
On body cam.
Or hit them or tase them.
And God forbid you're justified, like in this other shooting. What was it, in East Houston, where the guy was trying to grab the taser.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And they all four of them shot him at one time. And
they're justified.
Yeah, that one, Acevedo said everything they did was proper, but I just can't justify that many shots. That's not a police officer speaking.
Right. That's
somebody who's watching Law and Order.
Right.
I mean, that's like.
We'll explain that, and we can intersperse video of that shooting, but explain to our audience what happened in that shooting.
In April 2020, officers respond to a call about a man who was running in the roadway, screaming and throwing himself at passing cars. Officers' body camera clearly capture Nicholas Chavez acting crazy, babbling, and thrashing about the ground. A Houston sergeant, preparing for every contingency, tells some officers to get out their tasers while others hold lethal coverage.
Hey, bud. We're here to help you.
Chavez taunts the officers to shoot him.
We're here to help you, bud. Who lied? What's going on, man?
Officers can see that Chavez has something in his hand that could be a weapon. Officers make several attempts to communicate and de-escalate. At one point, Chavez tells the officers that he is an MRA patient and wants to die. Then Chavez tells an officer to shoot him and begins to advance on the officers.
No shooting. Calm down.
But when none of the officers shoot, Chavez resorts to waving his arms, screaming, and what looks like an attempt to cut himself with the weapon in his hand. In an attempt to stop Chavez from hurting an officer or himself, an officer deploys a beanbag shotgun. Chavez only asks the officer to give him another one. At this point, another officer deploys a taser, which has seemingly no effect on Mr. Chavez. Then Chavez continues to attempt to cut himself with a piece of metal in his hand. This, of course, would change the officer's perception of the piece of metal, since Chavez apparently believes it is dangerous.
Relax, man. Relax. Calm down. Calm down. Sit down, man. Just relax. Talk to us.
Chavez advances on the officer, still with the weapon in his hand. He continues to taunt the officers to shoot him.
Calm down now.
Several more beanbag rounds are deployed to no effect. In a cavalier manner, Chavez tells one of the officers, "Your shot is engaging." He continued to advance quickly, but came too close to an HPD sergeant and a Precinct 6 county deputy. The HPD sergeant shot him twice and was tased by the Precinct 6 deputy. This still does not completely stop Chavez. Here an officer makes a tactical decision to throw down his deployed taser in an attempt to keep other officers from being tangled and tripped by the wire. Chavez, still determined to die, refuses to drop the piece of metal in his hand. He continues to mock the officers.
Stop doing that to yourself, man. Doing that. Hey, we're here to help you, bud. Just come your way. Please comply with us. Please comply.
While HPD officers plead to allow Mr. Chavez to let them help him, he sees the dropped taser on the ground.
Don't get up. Do not get up. We want to get you the medical help that you need, man, but you got to allow us to do it. You have to allow us, bud. You have to allow us to do it. Please put that down, man. I don't want you to hurt yourself. Come on, man.
He laments to someone named Jane that he loves her, but is not going to spend the rest of his life in prison.
That's all I'm trying to do.
It is apparent that Chavez is determined to be killed. He bolts out of the ditch towards officers and is shot again and beanbag. Still determined to leave police no choice, he throws the weapon in his hand at the police officer and grabs the wire of the deployed taser and begins to drag it towards him. Despite being warned many times, he took the taser by the handle.
No, do it.
There were several officers close to Chavez at this point. 4 of them opened fire, killing Chavez just as he intended.
Don't do it, man.
Here from another angle, all 4 officers were forced to protect themselves and their fellow officers or face being tased by Chavez.
Don't do it.
Listen out.
Cease fire! Cease fire!
They were doing everything by policy. Then all of a sudden, 4 of them decided to shoot all at once. Well, why do you think 4 people all of a sudden came to the same conclusion to shoot?
They were trained that way.
Well, that's because something scared them. Something overt made all 4 of them go, "Whoa, this needs to shoot." You know, you and I can't decide where to go eat. You know,
Right.
So 4 people can't decide where to eat, but all of a sudden 4 people decide to use deadly force all at once. It's obvious that he did something, and what he did is he grabbed for the taser, okay, and so they all shot because it put them in what they thought was serious bodily injury or death was imminent to themselves or a third person.
Well, what people need to understand is a taser can be used as a weapon.
Sure.
It's a secondary impact weapon. And you're supposed to maintain one level higher use of force than the suspect is exhibiting.
Well, and if he tases you, and there is, tasers are very ineffective, but there is one type of person that works on every time. That's police officers in a class.
Yeah.
Okay, puts you down like a rhino. Everybody. So we know you get tased in the class. You are tased, so you know how quickly it incapacitates you. And is there a gun involved in this disturbance? Yeah, there was 6 officers, I think, on the scene. So there's 6 guns. Okay, we know there's 6 guns because they brought them with them. So are you going to let yourself get tased and then him grab your gun?
Right.
It's just ridiculous.
With a suspect who's constantly fighting, won't surrender,
It
won't
will
comply,
not
will not.
And actually, he said he used the term MHRA or whatever and he goes, "I am MHRA." Meaning mental health guy. He's already knows what to say.
Right. So
shoot me.
There's an independent homicide investigation. There's an independent shooters review board for the city of Houston. There's the Harris County Grand Jury. There's the district attorney's public integrity review group. So all 4 of these different bodies review the shooting, review the department's training policies, general orders, all that, and come to the conclusion that the officers were justified in their use of force. They still get fired. Art Acevedo, still fired them, right? So 4 different entities have cleared these people of the shooting, these officers, and yet Art Acevedo still fires them. This is the kind of irrational decision-making that he makes that will destroy the morale of your department, because you never know, even when you've been completely justified in the use of force, whether you're going to get to keep your job or not, because he is a reactionary egomaniac. And the people of Miami have really avoided the detrimental leadership of an egomaniac who just drops these rhetorical bombs everywhere he goes that are completely destructive to the law enforcement mission. And he's the chief of police. That's what blows my mind. He's the chief of police, and they keep putting him in these different chief of police positions. It's confounding to me. It vexes me, honestly, because if you show a history of morale destruction, increase in crime, increase in homeless population, increase in response times, everywhere you go, eventually somebody has to say, enough, we've had enough of you. Please retire and go away. And for some reason, the city of Miami is the only city that finally stood up and said, you know what, we've had enough of you, please go away.
And that was after a couple of months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it didn't take but a couple of months for us to realize.
Yeah.
I mean, we're like, ooh, this guy's just he's not fair. He is not fair to police officers.
At all. And so he came to Houston in November of 2016. Sylvester Turner was elected mayor. He decided he needed a new chief of police, someone from outside the department, which, by the way, I've never understood the rationale of constantly having to recruit a chief of police from outside the department when, you know, there's certain history, culture, like he changed the badges for HPD into some LA style looking badge that
over a century old. Yeah, the badge.
Horrible. They even took a vote of the officers to ask them, would you like to see the badge change? And I think 92% said no.
No.
But he did it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And his
like a dog pissing on a fire hydrant.
His thing was always, if you want to self-purchase, that was always his for uniforms. Everything that you could wear any uniform you want. If you want to self-purchase, you can get this badge. You know, you had to buy it yourself.
Right.
You know, the cadets weren't issued those badges. They, you know, he just did things by the seat of his pants. He told Chief McClellan in a meeting when McClellan was leaving, he goes, well, I try to do this, I try to do that. And he said, you just do it, Chuck. You just do it. You just do it. You know, and so just doing it.
Yeah, because the law doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Laws don't matter. Tradition doesn't matter.
No.
History doesn't matter. Policy doesn't matter. Just do it.
One of the reasons he's talking about getting a chief from the outside, for a smaller agency, it might be one thing. Okay, but Houston Police, we have a 6-month academy. We have a graduation from the academy. We have another 6 months on probation. We sit in the same seats. We sit in the same patrol cars. We work the same stations. We have a culture all of our own. We have a vernacular all of our own. And it's very difficult for some outside police officer to come in there and they don't know they don't even know the vernacular. He kept
everything is like we don't use 10 codes.
Yeah, he kept doing the 3.
Yeah,
which is or 4. Yeah, code 4. It's a California thing. He'd look at you if you're outside. One of the officers downtown said had tased a guy and arrested him, and the chief walked up and went, but he'd seen it on, the officer had seen it on the colors, so he knew code 4, so are you 4? I'm 1. Are you? Yes. I mean, then that's just you say, well, that's not big of a problem, but that is a small difference between a Houston police officer and an LAPD.
Well, for example,
what are the big differences?
Well, in California, you're supposed to advise the dispatcher when you have a suspect in custody. Mm-hmm. There's nothing in HPD policy that requires you to tell a dispatcher when you have a suspect in custody. So in his mindset, he's thinking, well, these officers aren't informing the dispatch they have a suspect in custody. So that's a problem. When it's never been a problem in the history of the Houston Police Department. to tell a dispatcher you have a suspect in custody because it's not anything. What the dispatcher doesn't care.
Oh, good for you.
Good for you. I mean, you want an attaboy over the radio? I mean,
exactly.
Good for you. Go back to your patrol car now. I mean, but he thinks that that's important because in California they think it's important, and it's those little things like that add up to bad decisions later. Mm-hmm. Because then he starts questioning officers on, well, did you read them their Miranda rights? That's actually not a requirement.
Yeah, especially if let me explain that to people out there, especially police officers in uniform. You usually catch them red-handed, right? What are you going to ask them? Their favorite color? You don't have any questions to ask them. Okay, I've caught you red-handed. I don't even need to ask you. I got your ID. I don't even need to talk to you. I know I caught you in the building.
I reached in the pocket. I found the cocaine. I don't need to ask you about the cocaine.
Yeah, exactly. It's yours.
It's yours.
As far as I'm concerned.
What's your name? What's your date of birth? Yeah, and so that kind of micromanaging mentality is what really cripples a police department. Because believe it or not, when you hire police officers, they go through extensive background checks. Like they called my ex-girlfriend. Now, I got on when I was 22 years old, so I only had one ex-girlfriend at the time. And they called her and they asked her, well, how was he? I'm like, it was a weird kind of thing. Yeah. She called me and she's like, HPD just called me and they were asking about you. I'm like, what did you say? Yeah. And fortunately, we were cool with each other, so she didn't compound any problems. And I was, went through the background check, but it was a year-long background check. And they give you 3 different psychological tests. They give you a lie detector test, and and a pretty extensive interview process. So by the time they're putting you in a uniform and giving you a badge and you're getting your weapon, they know who you are. Mm-hmm. They know that who they've put in uniform. They know who is on the street. And you kind of have to have faith that this officer is going to make certain decisions, and they have to have the latitude to make those decisions. It's called officer discretion. And one of the things that I've noticed in my time is how discretion has been subtracted from police officers time and time and time again. And the people doing it think they're doing it for the benefit of the citizenry, but they're not.
No, it's unreasonable enforcement of policy.
Right.
What we talked about. You can no longer see somebody go through a 4-way stop sign and roll through it at 3 a.m. when nobody else is there. If you got your body camera on.
Within reason. I mean, you don't always have to put somebody in jail all the time for anything. Mm-hmm. It's okay to say, you know what, you might or you might not be intoxicated. I'm not sure, but I'm going to let it go this time. But now there is no more of that. Mm-hmm. There is no more of that discretion. Body camera sees the DWI. You must arrest. You shall arrest. So I know what you're thinking. Well, then DWI arrest must be going through the roof. No.
Wrong.
Traffic stops have gone through the floor. The number of traffic stops police officers make have gone through the floor because now they know that they don't have discretion to do or not do certain things. And as a result, they will do less. They will take less proactive action. And as a result, fewer felony warrants are executed because most felony warrants are executed on traffic stops. Guy gets pulled over for running a red light. Turns out, he's got a felony warrant for theft or some other felony warrant.
Parole violator.
Yeah. A blue warrant or something like that. And you don't find that as much anymore because police officers don't want to do traffic stops because they don't have the discretion to overlook mistakes. People make mistakes. It's what they do. People are human beings. Citizens are human beings. They make mistakes. And police officers need to have the discretion to say, you know what, I'm not going to mess this guy's day up.
Yes, you want police officers to have discretion in your country, in your community. Without discretion, we live in an oligarchy where we are just appointed by the courts and we go and snatch you up no matter what and take you before a judge who then deals out your punishment or decides whether you're guilty. You want police officers it's like when people say, why do police officers get to drive however they want to? Because it's in the law. And it's necessary. You want police officers to be able to drive fast around traffic park where they want, drive on the sidewalk, do all these things, because if we can't service the public. We can't serve the public.
But also, the same person who's making that complaint, why do officers drive like that? Like they're responding to a call.
Mm-hmm.
And I guarantee you that very same person, when they get home and they find out their house has been burglarized or their car has been stolen or something else has happened and they pick up the phone and dial 911, they're going to want the officers there as fast as possible. But what they don't understand is for the officer to get there as fast as possible, they might have to, I don't know, work around a traffic law or two. They might have to speed.
Well, yeah, it's written into the law that they don't have to obey it. It's
right.
written in that they can disregard the traffic laws for a reason.
Yeah.
And we have to, as police officers, have to drive with due regard to the safety of the public. Obviously, if somebody is more dangerous to chase them on a freeway, I'm going to stop chasing them. Okay. If it's more dangerous to chase them, but I can disregard other laws and get to the call, be able to respond to the call. It's my one thing I always point out. Okay, I wanted to stop at the robbery, but I couldn't double park. I could see it going on. I saw the guy with the gun, but I couldn't just stop in the middle of the road. It's just ridiculous.
Somebody might complain.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody might complain. Why did you pull up on the sidewalk? Because I'm the police. And nobody does. Once you've been a police officer for 10 minutes, the first time you pull up on the sidewalk, and this is cool, I can do this, But then after a while, you're like, oh Lord, I'm pulling up on the sidewalk because now I got some crap to handle, Yeah,
and people make it out like police officers want to arrest people
constantly.
Yeah, and you don't, because it's paperwork.
Yeah, and you want to arrest criminals. It doesn't take long at all for a police officer who's been a police officer more than 10 minutes to know the difference between a public intoxication and a murder. I mean, the murder is a good one.
Right.
Public intoxication is a pain in the butt. And it's not, it doesn't harm our community for somebody to be publicly intoxicated. They understand the difference between what's necessary and what's not necessary. And the worst problem with police officers that I've seen, the worst thing about them is they're lazy. And so that's the worst problem about police officers. They don't want to do anything. And now the ones that don't want to do anything
are prolific.
Oh, man. And
it's like 20% of the department does 80% of the work.
Well, what did he say just a minute ago? We get, how long was the hiring process before you could even think about getting hired? A year before you even get a call. Okay, then you go and you take all of these tests. Then you, the psychological, the physical, all this stuff. Then you go to the academy for 6 months, and then you go on training for another 6 months before you're ever really a police officer by yourself. It takes a long time to get this job, and people don't want to lose it because it's Houston's a fairly good paying job.
Yeah.
Okay. But they don't want to lose it because the chief is being unfair, being unreasonable.
So then you do everything. So then your decision matrix becomes, what decision should I make so that I don't put my job in jeopardy?
Risk averse.
Yeah.
So exactly. And that makes for very poor policing.
Yes, it does.
And it makes for unsafe public. Okay. I don't know if you've noticed lately, people out there like in Houston, have you noticed that people are driving a little more erratically? Okay. The little road rage is going up. Okay. Why is road rage going up? Well,
because traffic stops are down.
The traffic stops are down. COVID, we can't do anything. People get disciplined if they for any little tiny thing. So why would I stop traffic? Why would I do that? And because it's right. Oh well, I still get paid. Whether it's right, it just doesn't make any sense. Police officers nobody stays in police work, especially in the Houston Police Department, to get there. Nobody goes through all the stuff you have to do to get that job simply to have a job. It's a calling. You have to want it. You have to want to do. And I don't know of anybody I've ever seen that took the job because, it's a job. Okay. That's Amazon or McDonald's.
Right.
Okay. Not the police department. I've seen some lazy officers, but everything just perplexes me.
And so while we're constantly looking for the demon to slay, in law enforcement. In other words, the public is always saying, what wrong thing is this officer doing? We forget that it's a necessary thing that must be done. And you must have some level of faith that your officers are going to do it right. Because there is so much by way of checks and balances. Like the district attorney does not, I don't even think they listen to police officers half the time they're talking to a police officer.
No, they don't.
And so if you don't think the DA is not sitting there and second guessing everything an officer does, then you're not paying attention, because that's all they do. That is literally all they do. And then you've got a judge, and now that, we have this battery of Democrat judges, even they're doing that. And of course, the jury is sitting there. And ultimately, when you go to trial, of course, you have 12 people who are doubting whether the officer is telling the truth or not. And then, because we live in the 21st century and everything's on video, we've kind of reached a point, I think, in police work where if it's not on video, are we sure it even happened?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no investigations anymore.
Right. And so that's something else that has come out of body cameras. Originally they were adopted because they were supposed to be used to find some evil racist officer shooting an innocent person of color. That's what we were convinced body cameras were going to do. They were going to, on every officer's uniform, there would be a body camera, and eventually we would find those evil Klansmen dressed up as police officers slaying innocent people of color.
Your true colors will be shown.
And if anything, the exact opposite is.
It was the absolute opposite. Now you see, when we walk in, Mama's howling at the moon, Daddy's punching holes in the wall, all the kids are drunk. Okay.
Yeah, and
you see all the dysfunction, all the things that people do, the way they get worked up, the way they scream at you, the way they holler and act totally unreasonable and force themselves into jail. So what did they do with it?
Well, they turned it into an instrument of authoritarian control.
Yeah, over police officers.
Over police officers.
Meaning, there's the general orders, right? We have these in Houston, they have the general orders. And one of the general orders is you can't read a newspaper while on duty.
Right.
Okay. It's got to be, the reading material's got to be, like you can read the general orders.
Yeah.
Like everybody does. Everybody wants to. Well, if that's on camera now, and it was never supposed to be used for these little rabbit trails, he was accused of being a racist and using excessive force and planting drugs and violating somebody's Fourth Amendment rights. But he didn't, was reading a newspaper. Okay. And that's what they all that stuff was proven that he didn't do any of this other stuff, but he was reading a newspaper.
So we're going to suspend him for reading the newspaper.
Exactly.
And then we're going to tell the public, well, we suspended that officer. But what you don't realize is the reason they were suspended is some rabbit trail investigation that resulted in some silly violation of department policy of an unnecessary nature, and that's why the officer got suspended. Well, he took his seatbelt off before he put his patrol car in park, and so we gave him a day off for that. But they don't tell you that. They just say, well, the officer was suspended.
Yeah.
And then, of course,
or for not wearing a seatbelt.
Yeah, and journalists don't ask, well, what was the underlying nature of the suspension? They don't ask that question. They just immediately turn to the news camera and say, and the officer was suspended. Yeah. And it's like, oh.
For not wearing a seatbelt. 4 to 6 feet.
Yeah. It's just, it's mind numbing, really. And that's something, because I've done a lot of interviews with the media over the last 15 years. And I have found that I spend a lot of time suggesting questions to reporters like, hey, okay, we're going to cover this topic. Maybe you should ask this question, because that would be, something I would ask if I was investigating this shooting or if I was investigating this interaction. And for example, we had an incident where 3 sheriff's deputies from Harris County got into a fight with a woman in front of a gas station. And for a very split second, you see her with her long fingernails going after the officer's face. She's trying to scratch his face. Mm-hmm. And so one of the other deputies punches her, which you clearly see that, right? Mm-hmm. And, I never saw any of the reporters stop and say, did she make contact with the deputy's face? Because that's ultimately what they were charging her with was assaulting a public servant because she was fighting a public servant. And it's as if that didn't even matter. You know, the force that she was applying towards the deputy, it didn't even matter. But it did matter because that was the underlying reason for the other officer using bodily force against her, which is a punch to the face is bodily force, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so he didn't pull out his flashlight and hit her in the head. He didn't pull out his nightstick and start beating her. He just used his hands, his fist, and he neutralized the threat because that was the most efficient way to resolve that confrontation at that very moment.
And getting scratched in the face is
painful.
Not a little thing.
No.
People say, well, you just scratched in the face. Well, let me try it for you. And you would have a fit. Those if you're going, it doesn't really matter.
And that's kind of I have found that I do that a lot here locally when I'm on the news is I'm simply trying to fill in the gaps because people gloss over the facts in order to get to what did the officer do wrong. And I'm always trying to put the brakes on people and say, hold on, what did the suspect do wrong? What necessitated this action by the officer? And what did the officer do right? And I've always kind of found it perplexing that even, you know, some people, not every journalist you come across, but some journalists just want to get to what did the officer do wrong instead of what's the truth. And I find that a little, I don't know, irritating.
Well, it's incredibly irritating, and it's doing nothing but getting sensational headlines. Okay, a police officer punches a woman is a lot more effective getting clicks or views than a police officer punches a woman to keep from having his eyes scratched out.
Yeah, that which would be the truth.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, maybe if they did it that way, people would go, really? Who's going to scratch the officer's eyes? Maybe they'd click even more. But, but they never do that.
Right.
You know,
And so that's kind of where I'm hoping these podcasts take us in the future, is that people understand why individual officers are making the very individual decisions that they're making, which are often predicated on their training, their policies, the procedures they've become accustomed to when answering calls and in dealing with the public.